She was dismissed the very moment she stepped through the door. Her dress, a soft cream-colored silk that cascaded in delicate waves, shimmered with a beauty that seemed too quiet, too simple for the high-end fashion world. The hemline, embroidered with intricate lace, looked like it belonged to a forgotten era. Her scuffed leather shoes and messy hair falling loosely down her back made her look completely out of place. A model, eyeing her to smirk, leaned toward her colleague and muttered loudly enough for the room to hear, "Is she lost? This isn't the local thrift store, darling." The room of top-tier designers and snobbish models gave her a cold, dismissive glance. The atmosphere was thick with ridicule. Then Ava stepped into the casting room, and the manager of the fashion show's voice sliced through the tension like a blade. "Are you kidding me? Do you think this is some joke? This is a serious casting. Get her out now." But Ava stood her ground. She didn't let their words or the sneers unnerve her. Instead, with calm composure, she looked the manager directly in the eye and spoke the one sentence that silenced the entire room. "I may not fit your idea of perfection, but I believe in what I can do." The room froze. For the first time, they realized she wasn't there to beg for validation. She was there to prove herself. This was only the beginning, and Ava was about to turn the fashion world upside down. Ava never dreamed she would find herself at the Hero Showcase. A designer by passion and a seamstress by trade, she had spent years working in her modest apartment, stitching clothes for others, never dreaming of walking the runway herself. Her fingers had mastered fabric and thread, but her heart had stayed safely hidden behind the safety of her sewing machine. But when the Hero Showcase announced the opening of the Community Spotlight segment, Ava felt something shift within her. A chance to showcase her talents, her creations, an opportunity to be seen, even if only for a brief moment. She knew she wasn't the kind of person who typically belonged in a place like this. It was a world of glamour, of elite designers, of models with names that echoed in the halls of fashion's highest echelons. Ava was just a small-town girl with a big dream. But when the letter arrived, the weight of it seemed almost too heavy to bear. Her dress was simple, but it shimmered with a beauty that spoke volumes. Soft cream-colored silk that cascaded in delicate waves. The hemline embroidered with intricate lace that looked like it belonged to a forgotten era. She poured her heart into every stitch, and when she looked at the finished piece, she saw more than fabric. She saw every dream she'd ever held in her quiet heart. But the moment Ava walked backstage a Hero, everything she had worked for seemed to shrink in comparison to the towering, intimidating world she had stepped into. Models walked past her, each of vision perfection, tall, slender, with flawless skin and sparkling eyes. Designers gave orders with sharp, rehearsed words, while stylists applied makeup and fussed over hair like soldiers preparing for battle. Ava stood at the edge of it all, her hands trembling as she clutched the dress she had worked on for months. "Who let the assistant backstage?" whispered one of the models, her eyes flicking over Ava with a barely concealed sneer. Ava kept her head down. She was used to being underestimated. After all, she wasn't one of the top designers. She wasn't a model. She was just someone who had spent her life quietly stitching, creating beauty for others, never asking for recognition. The show was about to begin, and Ava was thrust into a world she had never experienced. One where the eyes of the world would be on her, and every flaw would be exposed for all to see. Her turn was announced, and her heart nearly stopped. She was to walk the runway, wearing the dress she had made. But as she stood behind the curtain, she could hear the whispers growing louder, the laughs more distinct. "She's the one from the community segment, right? She looks like she belongs in a thrift store. She doesn't even know how to walk. This will be a disaster." Ava closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She tried to block it all out. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "You are not invisible. Walk like you matter." The lights hit her face the moment she stepped onto the runway. The cameras flashed. The music pounded in her ears. Every step felt like it weighed a ton. She was so small, so fragile, compared to the tall, poised models who glided effortlessly down the runway. She couldn't help but notice the faces in the front row. Designers, critics, the influential and powerful. They were looking at her, but not with the admiration she had hoped for. No, they were looking with judgment. Ava's heart raced. The laughter began, soft at first, but then louder, mocking her every movement. Is this a joke? One of the front row designers muttered under her breath. Ava's throat tightened. She stumbled. Her heel caught in the fabric of the dress, and before she knew it, she was falling forward. A collective gasp from the audience filled the air, followed by a burst of laughter that pierced her like a blade. She scrambled to catch herself, but the damage was done. Her face burned with humiliation as she stood up and finished the walk. She could barely feel her legs, her mind blank with the shame of what had just happened. Backstage, Ava rushed to the nearest corner, her hands shaking as she wiped away the tears that threatened to fall. She heard voices, the words stinging even though she tried to ignore them. That was pathetic, one of the stylists snickered. She can't even walk in her own dress. How did she even get here? Ava swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. She wasn't supposed to be here. This world wasn't for her. She wanted to run, to escape back to the quiet safety of her small apartment. But then she heard footsteps approaching. A voice cut through the chatter, and when she looked up, she saw him, Victor Hayes, the renowned creative director of Hero. His cold, assessing eyes locked onto her. What was that? His tone was ice. Did you think this was a game? This is a high-fashion show, not some amateur hour. Ava opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. She felt so small, so unimportant in front of him. His eyes narrowed. You've wasted my time. If I'd known you were going to make a mockery of my event, I would have never allowed you to walk. He turned on his heel and walked away without another word. Ava's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. But a strange fire was burning within her now, a spark that hadn't been there before. No, she thought, wiping her face with the back of her hand. No, I won't let this be the end. The backstage of Hero was filled with the sound of hurried footsteps, the constant hum of whispered gossip, and the rustling of fabric. Ava stood off to the side, her heart still pounding from the cruel laughter that echoed in her ears. She knew it had been a disaster. There was no hiding it. But there was one thing that was clearer now than ever before. She wasn't going to let this be the end. Victor Hayes had dismissed her like she was nothing, and in a way, she had almost believed it. She had almost given in to the suffocating pressure to be perfect, to fit into the mold that everyone around her seemed to occupy with ease. But she wasn't made of that kind of material. Ava knew she didn't belong in this world of polished designers and flawless models. She was different, and maybe that was what they couldn't understand. Ava walked back to her corner, away from the frenzy. The stitching she had poured her heart into was a symbol of who she was. Of all the times she had to work late into the night, of all the times she had been overlooked, undervalued, and dismissed. But it was also a symbol of resilience. She would rise from this. She would prove them wrong. As she adjusted the dress she had created, she took in the chaos around her, the models who were perfect, confident, effortless, the designers who barked orders with such ease, their fingers already moving on the next project. And then there was Ava, timid, nervous, lost. But she wasn't going to run. Not this time. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. You are not invisible. Walk like you matter. She spent the next hour alone, taking deep breaths as she focused on the dress. Her creation. She ran her fingers along the silk, feeling the weight of every stitch, every seam. She thought about the woman who would wear this dress one day. She thought about the strength it would take to wear it in a world that would try to break her, a world that would laugh at her every misstep. Her mind wandered back to that humiliating moment on the runway. She could still feel the heat in her face, the burning humiliation that had washed over her as she stumbled. But instead of hiding from it, she embraced it. Failure is not the end. It's just part of the story. She repeated that to herself until it became a mantra. Time was running out. The next round of models was about to walk, and she still had no idea what Victor Hayes had planned for her. But something had shifted within Ava. She was no longer afraid of what would happen next. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about her. And she wasn't going to let a room full of people determine her worth. The voice came over the speaker. Next up, Ava Carver. Ava froze. The crowd would never expect her to rise. They would expect her to fail, to crumble. But that's exactly what made it so important. It was time to rewrite the story. She took a deep breath, her hands still shaking slightly as she stood in front of the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman in a gown that she had made with her own hands, her heart stitched into every inch of it. There was power in that. There was power in showing up. The music began to pulse, and the lights dimmed as the next model stepped out onto the runway. The audience's attention shifted. The front row buzzed with anticipation, eager for the next perfect display of luxury, grace, and wealth. Ava stood at the edge of the stage, knowing it was now or never. She glanced at the rows of critics, designers, and influencers. They were all watching, waiting for her to fail. The judgment was palpable. Ava swallowed hard and stepped onto the stage. She could hear the murmurs before the first step. Some of the models looked at her, barely hiding their amusement. She didn't belong here, and they were going to make sure she knew it. As Ava began her walk, she could hear the whispers from the crowd. She's still here? Does she really think she can pull this off? Her footsteps echoed in the silence, the weight of the moment threatening to crush her with every step. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, her heart racing. She felt as though her body was moving on instinct alone, the nerves coursing through her veins, the voice in her head urging her to keep going. But then, just as she was getting into the rhythm, her heel caught once again. She felt the slip, the lurch of her body, the momentary panic. The crowd gasped, the cruel laughter rising like a wave. She had done it again. The disaster was happening all over again. But Ava wasn't going to let it stop her this time. She steadied herself, refusing to falter. She focused on the next step, and then another. She raised her chin, the tremble in her body giving way to something deeper, something stronger. Ava could feel the heat in her chest, the fire building with every step. As she moved down the runway, the laughter began to fade. She took a breath, her eyes widening in realization. It wasn't a stumble. It was a chance to show them who she was. With one final push, she found the rhythm. The gown she wore seemed to come to life, swaying with grace and confidence, as if it, too, was fighting to prove its worth. Each step was a declaration, a promise that she would not let them break her. She wasn't a joke. She wasn't a mistake. She was here, and she mattered. As Ava reached the end of the runway, the lights shining down on her like a spotlight, she stopped. The room had fallen silent. The audience, who moments ago had laughed at her, were now watching in awe. The quiet had replaced the mockery. For the first time, she felt it, a shift. Her heart was pounding in her chest. But this time, it was a rhythm of victory, not failure. She held her head high, breathing deeply, her body standing tall despite the doubts that had tried to crush her. Ava had done it. She had risen. And as she turned, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Would they laugh again? Would they mock her? But then something unexpected happened. The front row, a row of the most prestigious designers, critics, and influencers, began to clap, slowly at first, and then faster, louder. It wasn't the applause of sympathy. It wasn't the forced kindness of polite clapping. No, this was real, genuine. They were clapping for her. Ava didn't need to look back to know it. The cheer grew louder, spreading like wildfire through the room. The crowd that had once laughed at her now stood in admiration, their applause reverberating off the walls of Hero. She was no longer invisible. Ava had risen. The applause continued, reverberating in Ava's chest like a steady drumbeat. She had just stepped off the stage, her heart still racing, but now it was a rhythm of anticipation. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The room had gone from mocking her to acknowledging her, and she could almost taste the sweet victory that hung in the air. But the show was far from over. Victor Hayes stepped onto the stage, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd, his expression as unreadable as always. Now, let's move on to the next phase of Hero, he announced, his voice smooth and commanding. The final round. It's time to get to know our contestants a little better. Ava's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't part of the plan. She had been humiliated on that stage, but she had fought back, and now the real test was about to begin. The models, those who had dismissed her, the ones with their designer outfits and pristine faces, took their places in front of the judges. Ava stood at the back, waiting her turn, feeling the weight of all eyes on her once again. This time, it wasn't just about walking. This was a battle of minds. A chance to prove that she was more than just a seamstress, that she was more than just an underdog. She was here, and she belonged. One by one, the models answered questions with practiced ease. The judges fired questions at them, and their responses were polished, rehearsed, full of charm and confidence. How would you define beauty? Victor Hayes asked the first model, a tall, striking woman with platinum blonde hair, her voice as smooth as silk. Beauty, she said confidently, is perfection, the flawless, the unattainable. It's about being sculpted, flawless, the kind of beauty that others can't reach. The crowd nodded in agreement, the judges murmuring their approval. It was the answer they expected, safe, predictable, easy. Next came a model with raven black hair and piercing blue eyes, who was immediately asked, "What do you think makes someone unforgettable?" Her answer was sharp, full of self-assurance. Unforgettable is someone who has presence, someone who leaves an impact, who doesn't apologize for standing out. It's about having power. The room buzzed with approval. Again, it was exactly what they wanted to hear. Confidence, dominance, perfection. And then the spotlight turned to Ava. She stepped forward, feeling the weight of the silence that fell over the room. Her palms were damp, her heart thudding in her chest. This wasn't a runway now. This was the moment where she would prove herself, not just as a designer, but as a person. She wasn't just answering a question. She was answering for every time she'd been underestimated, for every person who had told her she didn't belong. Victor Hayes tilted his head. "Ava Carver," he said, the name almost sounding like a challenge. "What do you think makes a person truly beautiful?" The room went quiet. Ava could feel the model's eyes on her, their expressions ranging from amusement to curiosity. She knew they expected her to falter, to say something foolish, something that would allow them to dismiss her once again. But she was done with being dismissed. She was done with apologizing for who she was. She took a breath, steadying herself. "Beauty," she said, her voice firm but gentle, "is not about perfection. It's about resilience. It's about the strength to stand tall when the world tells you to stay down. It's about being kind and about knowing your worth even when others don't see it. True beauty is in the imperfections, in the scars, in the moments where you get back up after falling." The room fell silent. It wasn't the answer they had expected. It wasn't rehearsed or polished. But it was real. It was raw. And Ava felt her heart settle into a steady, calming rhythm as she spoke. The silence lingered for a moment longer before it was broken by a few slow claps. It started in the front row, from a designer who had seen something different in her, something no one else had noticed. Then, one by one, the rest of the room joined in, the applause growing louder with each passing second. Ava stood still, stunned by the overwhelming reaction. Victor Hayes, ever professional, allowed the applause to die down before speaking again. His eyes locked onto Ava's with an intensity she had never seen before. "You have proven yourself," he said quietly, almost to himself. "You've done more than just walk that runway. You reminded us of what this show should be about. It's not just about the clothes. It's about the person wearing them. It's about heart." Ava's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the judgment she had been expecting. It wasn't cold, clinical scrutiny. This was respect. Victor turned to the other judges. "Ava Carver has shown us something that no one else has. She may not have the perfect pedigree, but she has something far more valuable. She has heart, and that, my friends, is what will set her apart." The applause erupted again, louder this time, almost deafening. Ava blinked back tears, the weight of the moment sinking in. She had done it. She had proven them all wrong. But the moment wasn't over. There was still one final surprise waiting for her. Victor turned to the audience. "Now, we come to the most important part of the show. We will announce the winner of Hero." Ava's heart skipped. She had never imagined she would make it this far, let alone win. She had come to the show to prove she wasn't invisible, to prove that she had something worth sharing. But to win? That was something she hadn't even dared to dream about. Victor's voice rang out again. "The winner of Hero is Ava Carver." The crowd went wild. Ava's legs almost buckled beneath her. It was as though the world was spinning, the cheers and claps swirling around her. She blinked again, as if to clear her vision, to make sure she wasn't imagining it. But no, the spotlight was on her. She was the winner. Ava stepped forward, her heart still thundering in her chest. She hadn't won because she was the most polished, the most glamorous. She had won because she had stayed true to herself. She had risen from the mockery and the doubt, proving that resilience, courage, and heart mattered more than anything else. As she accepted her trophy, Victor Hayes leaned in, speaking quietly so only she could hear. You were right, Ava. Beauty isn't about perfection. It's about strength. And you've shown us all exactly what that looks like. With a final, triumphant smile, Ava took her place at the center of the stage, the applause still ringing in her ears. The same crowd that had once mocked her was now standing in admiration. She had done it. She had proved them all wrong. And for the first time in her life, Ava Carver finally felt like she belonged. Ava stepped into the world of high fashion with grace and power, her name quickly becoming synonymous with both fierce runway presence and exquisite design. She built an empire from the ground up, her simple yet stunning creations making waves across the globe. From the girl who was once dismissed, Ava had become a supermodel and visionary designer, proving that true beauty lies in resilience, heart, and believing in oneself.